It was a Saturday morning, the kind where you wake up feeling like the day is yours to enjoy. The air was cool and fresh, perfect for sipping coffee on the porch or maybe taking a walk around the neighborhood. But my peaceful morning took a sharp turn the moment I stepped outside. There, blocking my driveway, were bright orange cones with a sign that read, Asterisk unauthorized vehicle parking violation. Towing enforced by Willow Creek Security. Asterisk, my heart sank as I stared at it in disbelief. My car, the one I'd parked safely in my own driveway the night before, was now apparently violating some rule I didn't even know existed. I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and say it was all a big joke. Instead, I saw him, a security guard named Carl, leaning casually against his golf cart near the curb. He had a clipboard in hand and a smug look on his face. "Morning," he said, tipping an imaginary hat. His tone was casual, but there was something about his smirk that made my blood boil. "You're violating Section 7.4 of the HOA guidelines. Driveway parking requires prior approval." I blinked at him, trying to process what he just said. Prior approval? For my own driveway asterisk? I asked, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "Rules are rules, ma'am. You should have checked with the HOA before parking there." I wanted to scream. Who makes these rules? And why does anyone have the right to tell me how to use my property? But instead of yelling, I took a deep breath and tried to think clearly. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. It felt personal, like they were deliberately making life harder for no good reason. As I stood there, staring at Carl and those ridiculous cones, something clicked in my mind. A memory surfaced from months ago, when I'd been sorting through old papers after moving into Willow Creek. I'd found a dusty folder labeled asterisk HOA documents, asterisk filled with pages of fine print about covenants, conditions, and restrictions. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention to it. It seemed boring and unimportant. But now, standing here in my pajamas, fuming over this absurd situation, I remembered something unusual I'd read. Buried deep in the fine print was a clause about membership numbers. According to Article XII, Section 3, the HOA could only operate legally if at least 60% of homeowners remained active members. If membership dropped below that threshold, the HOA would dissolve automatically. Even more shocking, a note at the bottom showed that current membership was teetering dangerously close to that limit, just 59%. At first, I thought it might be a typo or irrelevant detail. But now, as Carl smirked at me in my blocked driveway, I realized it wasn't just a random fact. It was a weapon, a way to fight back against their nonsense. That's when a slow smile spread across my face. They thought they had the upper hand, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. This wasn't going to end with me towing my car or paying some ridiculous fee. No, this was going to end with me teaching them a lesson they wouldn't forget anytime soon. After Carl drove off in his golf cart, leaving me stranded with my blocked driveway and boiling frustration, I went back inside to figure out my next move. The HOA had clearly overstepped this time, but I couldn't let my emotions take over. If I wanted to win this fight, I needed a plan and patience. First things first, I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything. I snapped photos of the orange cones, the sign, and even Carl's smug face as he lingered by the curb earlier. Evidence mattered, especially when dealing with people who thrived on control and intimidation. Then, still simmering with anger, I sat down at the kitchen table and drafted an email to Patricia Langley, the HOA president. Her name alone made my skin crawl, but I kept my tone polite and professional. "Dear Ms. Langley," I wrote, "I'm confused about the recent notice regarding unauthorized parking in my driveway. Could you please clarify why prior approval is required for using my own property?" Predictably, her response came within hours. It was short, cold, and dismissive. She cited some vague section of the guidelines and ended with a reminder that rules were put in place for the benefit of the community. Translation: Do what we say, or else. But here's the thing, I wasn't scared of her threats anymore. Because while waiting for her reply, I dug deeper into those old HOA documents I'd found months ago. That clause about membership numbers. It wasn't just buried in fine print. It was golden. According to Article XI, Section 3, if fewer than 60% of homeowners remained active members, the HOA would dissolve automatically. And based on the information provided in the same document, membership was already teetering at exactly 59%. One more resignation, and the whole system would collapse like a house of cards. The realization gave me chills. For years, the HOA had bullied residents into compliance, enforcing petty rules and collecting dues without question. But now, armed with this knowledge, I had the power to change everything. All I needed was support, from enough neighbors willing to stand up and say, enough. That evening, after calming down and convincing Dave not to storm over to the HOA office, I decided to test the waters. I reached out to Sarah, a young mom from down the street whose kids often played with mine. We'd bonded over shared complaints about the HOA before, how they fined her for hanging holiday lights too early, and sent letters criticizing her mailbox color. When I told her about the membership clause, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you serious?" she whispered, glancing nervously toward her front window, as if someone might be listening. "If we could actually dissolve the HOA." "I know," I said, leaning closer. "Imagine no more ridiculous fines, no more inspections, no more feeling like prisoners in our own homes. But it'll only work if enough of us join forces." Sarah hesitated, biting her lip. "What happens if they find out?" "They'll come after us." "They're already coming after us," I reminded her, gesturing toward my blocked driveway. "At least this way, we're fighting back." She nodded slowly, determination replacing fear. "Count me in." Encouraged by her reaction, I spent the next few days quietly reaching out to other neighbors. Some were hesitant, worried about rocking the boat or facing retaliation. Others lit up at the idea of taking down the HOA once and for all. By the end of the week, I had a small but committed group ready to help spread the word. We called ourselves the Freedom Fighters, though secretly, we didn't want the HOA catching wind of our plans too soon. Still, playing along wasn't easy. Every day, I dealt with new absurdities. My car remained banned from my driveway, forcing me to park blocks away and lug groceries home on foot. Yard inspectors showed up unannounced, scrutinizing every blade of grass and flower pot. Even the mail carrier seemed to glare at me, as if delivering letters to a troublemaker was beneath him. Each incident fueled my resolve, reminding me why this fight mattered so much. And through it all, I held on to one thought. Soon, very soon, the tables would turn. The days that followed were a mix of frustration and quiet determination. Every morning, I woke up knowing the HOA was still out there, lurking like a shadow over our lives. But now, I had a secret weapon, and a growing team of neighbors ready to fight back. The challenge was keeping everything under wraps until we had enough support to strike. To avoid suspicion, I decided to play along with their rules. For now, when the HOA sent another letter reminding me about the driveway violation, I didn't argue. Instead, I called a tow truck to move my car, gritting my teeth as the driver hooked it up and hauled it away. It felt humiliating, watching my own vehicle being taken because of some ridiculous rule I hadn't even known existed. But I reminded myself, this was all part of the bigger plan. Let them think they'd won this round while we worked behind the scenes to take them down completely. Meanwhile, Sarah and I started organizing secret meetings. We couldn't risk holding them in anyone's home. It was too easy for nosy neighbors or HOA spies to catch on. So we got creative. Our first gathering happened at the local park, disguised as a casual playdate for the kids. While the little ones ran around on the swings, we huddled on a bench, whispering about the membership clause and strategizing how to get more people on board. "Do you really think this will work?" Sarah asked, glancing nervously toward the parking lot where a few other moms were chatting. "What if someone finds out?" "It has to work," I replied firmly. "And we'll be careful. No emails, no texts, only face-to-face conversations with people we trust." By the end of the week, our group had grown. Mark, a young dad who lived 2 streets over, joined after hearing about how the HOA fined him for leaving his trash cans out an hour too long. Then there was Mr. Harper, an elderly man whose garden had been deemed non-compliant because his rose bushes weren't spaced exactly 18 inches apart. Each new member brought fresh stories of frustration and a renewed sense of purpose. Our strategy was simple but effective. We divided the neighborhood into sections and assigned each freedom fighter a list of households to approach discreetly. At these visits, we kept things light, starting with small talk before casually mentioning the membership clause. Most people were shocked when they heard about it. Some signed resignation forms on the spot. Others needed time to think. Either way, we made sure to leave no trace of our efforts. No flyers, no notes, nothing that could tip off the HOA. But not everyone was eager to join the cause. A few neighbors flat out refused, claiming they didn't want to rock the boat or risk lowering property values. One woman even scolded me, saying, "If you don't like the rules, maybe you should move." Her words stung, but I knew better than to let them derail me. Change never came without resistance, and I was prepared to face it head-on. As the numbers slowly added up, I began noticing subtle shifts in the neighborhood. People started nodding hello more often, exchanging knowing looks when the HOA patrol drove by. Conversations that once centered on the weather or weekend plans now carried undertones of rebellion. The air felt electric, charged with the possibility of something big happening. Still, the HOA wasn't going down without a fight. They seemed to sense that something was brewing, doubling down on enforcement to scare us into submission. Speed checks popped up overnight. Yard inspections became almost daily occurrences. And yes, my driveway remained blocked, forcing me to walk farther than ever to retrieve my car. Every new rule felt like a slap in the face, but also a reminder of why we couldn't give up. One evening, as I trudged back from yet another distant parking spot, dragging groceries and trying not to trip over uneven sidewalks, I caught sight of Carl, the security guard, smirking from his golf cart. He tipped his hat mockingly, clearly enjoying the power he thought he held over me. For a moment, anger bubbled inside me so fiercely that I wanted to march right up to him and shout the truth that his precious HOA was on the brink of collapse. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled sweetly and waved, letting him bask in his false sense of victory. Because deep down, I knew the real battle was just beginning. And when the final blow landed, it would hit harder than anything Carl, or Patricia Langley, could imagine. As the days turned into weeks, our secret plan gained momentum. The freedom fighters worked tirelessly, knocking on doors and spreading the word about the HOA's weak spot, the membership clause. Each new signature on a resignation form felt like a small victory, but we knew we were walking a tightrope. One wrong move, one loose lip, and the HOA could catch wind of what we were doing. So we stayed cautious, meeting in parks, coffee shops, or even pretending to take evening walks just to exchange updates. Despite the progress, tension simmered beneath the surface. The HOA seemed to sense that something was off. Their enforcement became almost obsessive. Every morning, I'd wake up to find fresh notices taped to my door, reminders about violations I hadn't committed, warnings about unapproved activities, and thinly veiled threats about fines. It was exhausting, but it also fueled my determination. Let them throw everything they had at us. We were building something bigger than their petty rules. One afternoon, as I sat on my porch pretending to read a book, I noticed Carl cruising down the street in his golf cart. He slowed near my house, giving me a long, suspicious look before driving off. My stomach tightened. Had someone said something? Was he onto us? I quickly texted Sarah, who reassured me that no one had slipped up. Still, paranoia crept in. What if they started investigating homeowners who suddenly resigned? What if they found a way to block our efforts? To counteract their growing pressure, we decided to step up our game. Instead of just resigning quietly, we encouraged people to write letters explaining why they were leaving the HOA. Some cited unreasonable fines, others complained about invasive inspections, and a few simply stated they wanted to live freely without constant oversight. These letters weren't just symbolic, they were ammunition. If things got ugly, we could use them to show exactly how unpopular the HOA really was. But then came the moment that tested us all. Late one Friday evening, I received a frantic call from Mark. His voice trembled as he explained that the HOA had sent him a formal warning. Apparently, someone had reported him for suspicious behavior. He admitted he'd been nervous during his rounds talking to neighbors, and now he feared he'd drawn attention to himself. "We need to lay low for a while," he urged. "If they start digging deeper, they'll figure out what we're doing." I understood his fear, but pulling back wasn't an option. We were so close, just a handful of resignations away from hitting the magic number. I called an emergency meeting, disguised as another casual park outing, to discuss our next steps. After some debate, we agreed to split into smaller teams, working faster but more discreetly. Each team would focus on specific streets, avoiding overlap and minimizing the risk of detection. The added caution paid off. Over the next week, we secured 5 more resignations, bringing us dangerously close to our goal. But the closer we got, the more desperate the HOA became. New signs appeared around the neighborhood, reminding everyone of the importance of community harmony and urging residents to report any unusual activity. Anonymous notes showed up on doorsteps, accusing certain households of stirring trouble. The atmosphere grew tense, like a storm brewing overhead. One evening, as I walked home from a meeting, I saw Carl again. This time, he didn't smirk or tip his hat. He stared at me with narrowed eyes, as if trying to piece together a puzzle. My heart raced, but I forced myself to smile and wave casually. Inside, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed every conversation, every interaction, searching for any sign we'd been careless. Had someone mentioned the membership clause too loudly? Did we leave behind clues that could unravel everything? Doubts swirled in my mind, but amid the uncertainty, one thing remained clear. We were too far in to turn back now. Whatever happened next, we had to see it through. And deep down, I knew the finish line was within reach. The tension reached its peak when we finally secured the last resignation needed to dissolve the HOA. It was a Thursday evening, and I'll never forget the mix of relief and adrenaline coursing through me as Sarah handed over the signed form. We had done it. 59% membership officially dropped below the threshold. The HOA's reign of control was over, but celebrating felt premature. If anything, this was the most dangerous moment yet. Now we had to reveal our hand without giving them a chance to fight back. That night, I sat at my kitchen table drafting a letter to Patricia Langley and the rest of the HOA board. It wasn't just any letter, it was our declaration of victory. In clear, formal language, I outlined exactly what we'd uncovered. The membership clause buried in their own guidelines, the fact that they were operating illegally, and proof that enough homeowners had resigned to trigger dissolution. I attached copies of the resignation forms and letters from neighbors explaining why they'd left. Every word was deliberate, every detail calculated. This wasn't just about ending the HOA. It was about exposing their hypocrisy and holding them accountable for years of bullying. Before sending the letter, I made one final move. Remembering how quickly things could spiral out of control, I decided to protect ourselves by going public. Using an anonymous email account, I sent the same information to local news outlets, along with photos of absurd HOA violations, like my blocked driveway, and screenshots of their ridiculous rules. Within hours, reporters started calling. By morning, the story was everywhere, on TV, online, even trending on social media. Willow Creek had become ground zero for a national conversation about homeowners' rights and HOA abuse. Predictably, the backlash hit hard. The HOA scrambled to save face, issuing statements claiming the resignations were invalid and accusing us of illegal activities. They even tried to intimidate people into reversing their decisions, threatening lawsuits and warning of plummeting property values. But it was too late. Public opinion had turned against them. Neighbors who had once been hesitant to join us now stood firmly on our side, emboldened by the growing support from outside the community. Even some former HOA board members distanced themselves, claiming ignorance or blaming others for the worst offenses. Carl, the smug security guard, became a symbol of everything wrong with the HOA. Reporters camped outside his house, asking him to explain why he thought blocking driveways and fining kids for riding bikes was reasonable behavior. He avoided cameras like the plague, but his reputation was already ruined. Meanwhile, Patricia Langley went silent, refusing interviews and hiding behind her lawyers. For someone who thrived on control, she must have hated feeling powerless. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of justice in the air. People were talking openly about the toll the HOA had taken on their lives. The stress, the financial strain, the constant fear of being penalized for nothing. One neighbor tearfully admitted she'd stopped planting flowers because she was terrified of violating landscaping rules. Another confessed he'd missed family gatherings because he couldn't afford the fines for overdue dues. Hearing these stories only strengthened my resolve. What we were doing wasn't just about dismantling an organization. It was about reclaiming our freedom. Still, the fight wasn't entirely over. The HOA didn't go down quietly. They filed motions, demanded investigations, and tried to drag us into court. But with the weight of public scrutiny bearing down on them, and mounting legal fees, they eventually crumbled. On a rainy Tuesday morning, a certified letter arrived confirming what we'd worked so hard to achieve. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association was officially dissolved. As I held that letter in my hands, tears welled up in my eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer disbelief that we'd actually pulled it off. After months of frustration, secrecy, and resistance, we'd won. The neighborhood belonged to us again, and while I knew challenges lay ahead, I also knew one thing for certain. Together, we were stronger than any rulebook or tyrant. The days following the HOA's official dissolution were a whirlwind of emotions. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave, but it was mixed with disbelief and even a little nervousness. For so long, the HOA had loomed over our lives like a dark cloud, dictating every detail of how we lived. Now that it was gone, I couldn't help but wonder, what comes next? At first, the change felt surreal. The bright orange cones blocking my driveway disappeared overnight, as if they'd never existed. Carl's golf cart was nowhere to be seen, and Patricia Langley's name vanished from community emails. It was strange, not having someone watching your every move or penalizing you for planting the wrong flowers. But beneath the quiet, there was an undeniable energy in the air. Neighbors who had once avoided each other started talking again. People waved from their porches, exchanged gardening tips, and even organized impromptu block parties. Willow Creek was waking up, shedding its sterile, controlled shell and becoming something more alive. Of course, not everyone adjusted easily. Some residents worried about what the lack of oversight might mean. Would property values drop without strict rules? Who would enforce basic standards, like keeping yards tidy or preventing loud parties late at night? These concerns weren't entirely unfounded, but most of us agreed that living without fear of petty fines was worth the trade-off. Besides, freedom came with responsibility. If we wanted Willow Creek to thrive, it was up to us, not some faceless board, to make it happen. To ease the transition, a few of us formed a volunteer committee to address practical matters. We called it the Willow Creek Community Alliance, a name chosen to emphasize cooperation rather than control. Unlike the HOA, this group had no power to issue fines or enforce rules. Instead, we focused on fostering communication and solving problems together. For example, when Mrs. Peterson expressed concern about her neighbor's overgrown hedges, we helped arrange a friendly conversation instead of sending threatening letters. When Mr. Harper needed help trimming his trees, several neighbors pitched in to lend a hand. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild where it had been shattered. Meanwhile, the national attention our story received brought unexpected benefits. Homeowners from other neighborhoods reached out, asking for advice on how to challenge their own oppressive HOAs. Local officials took notice too, proposing reforms to prevent similar abuses elsewhere. Our little rebellion had sparked a larger movement, one that gave me hope for communities everywhere. Still, I couldn't shake the occasional pang of unease. Old habits die hard, and some neighbors struggle to let go of the need for perfection. A few continue policing themselves, and others, out of habit, questioning whether someone's mailbox color was too bold or if a garden sculpture was tacky. Each time I heard whispers of judgment, I reminded myself that change takes time. Not everyone could unlearn years of conditioning overnight, but the fact that we were discussing these issues openly, rather than hiding behind anonymous complaints, felt like progress. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I noticed something remarkable. Kids were riding bikes down the street, laughing without a care in the world. Someone had painted their front door a vibrant shade of turquoise, while another neighbor hung wind chimes that chimed softly in the breeze. There was color, life, and personality everywhere, things that had been missing for far too long. Dave joined me on the porch, handing me a glass of lemonade. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said, smiling. "It does," I replied, sipping slowly, "like we're finally home." And for the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I truly believed it. The battle had been hard-fought, but the reward was sweeter than I ever imagined. Freedom wasn't just a word anymore, it was our reality. And nothing could take that away from us. Life in Willow Creek settled into a new rhythm, one that felt more natural and human than anything we'd experienced before. The absence of the HOA didn't mean chaos, it meant choice. For the first time, residents could make decisions about their homes and lives without fear of punishment or judgment. It was freeing, but it also came with challenges. Learning to balance individuality with community spirit wasn't always easy, but it made our neighborhood stronger in ways I never expected. One of the biggest changes was how people started personalizing their homes. Bright colors began popping up everywhere. Turquoise doors, yellow shutters, even murals painted on garage walls. Mrs. Peterson, who used to pride herself on her perfectly symmetrical flower beds, surprised everyone by planting wild sunflowers that swayed lazily in the breeze. "I guess it's nice to let things grow freely for once," she admitted with a shy smile when I complimented her garden. Even Mr. Harper, the elderly man with the rose bushes, added quirky garden gnomes to his yard, earning nods of approval from passing neighbors. The kids loved the newfound freedom too. Without speed checks or constant warnings about playing in the streets, they turned cul-de-sacs into playgrounds. Bikes zipped around corners, chalk art covered sidewalks, and laughter echoed through the air. One Saturday morning, Sarah organized a scavenger hunt that brought nearly every family outside. Watching parents cheer as their children raced to find hidden treasures reminded me why neighborhoods exist, not just for houses, but for connection. Still, not everything changed overnight. Some old habits lingered, especially among those who had grown accustomed to the HOA's rigid structure. A few neighbors continued whispering about standards and whether certain decorations were too much. At first, these murmurs bothered me, but over time, I realized they weren't malicious. They were simply reminders of how deeply ingrained the HOA's influence had been. Rather than shutting them down, I tried to redirect their energy. When someone questioned a neighbor's bold paint job, I'd say, "Isn't it great? It makes the street feel so lively." Slowly, attitudes shifted. What once might have sparked complaints now sparked conversations, and sometimes even admiration. Our volunteer committee played a key role in keeping things running smoothly. Instead of imposing rules, we focused on collaboration. For example, when a dispute arose between two neighbors over shared driveway space, we facilitated a calm discussion that ended with both parties agreeing to split maintenance costs equally. When a storm knocked down trees across several yards, we rallied volunteers to help clean up. These small victories prove that communities don't need threats or fines to thrive. They need trust, communication, and a willingness to work together. As weeks turned into months, I noticed something profound. Willow Creek had become more than just a place to live. It had become a true neighborhood, a patchwork of personalities, quirks, and stories woven together by shared experiences. People looked out for each other. If someone fell ill, meals appeared on their doorstep. If a newcomer moved in, welcome baskets followed soon after. Even Carl, the former security guard, softened over time. He stopped glaring at us and even joined in during a holiday cookie exchange, bringing gingerbread cookies shaped like golf carts. Looking back, I realized the real victory wasn't dissolving the HOA. It was rediscovering what it means to belong. Before, we'd been isolated, afraid to step out of line or speak our minds. Now we laughed together, argued constructively, and supported one another through thick and thin. We weren't perfect, but we were real. And that made all the difference. One evening, as I stood on my porch watching the sunset bathe the neighborhood in golden light, Dave leaned against the railing beside me. "You did good," he said softly. "We did good," I corrected, smiling, because none of this would have happened without the courage of so many neighbors willing to stand up and say enough was enough. Willow Creek wasn't paradise, but it was ours. And in the end, that was all that mattered.